Hi, good evening. Today's story is titled How the Rhinoceros Got His Skin. And this is a story from a collection of short stories by Rudyard Kipling titled Just So Stories by Rudyard Kipling. So now this story starts like this. Once upon a time, on an uninhabited island on the shores of the Red Sea, there lived a Parsi, from whose hat the rays of the sun were reflected in more than oriental splendor. I'll explain this to you. Once upon a time, on an uninhabited island, in that place, there are islands in the ocean, small patches of land above the sea. That's called an island. And this was uninhabited. That means there was nobody living in that island. Only maybe animals or creatures, birds and squirrels and lizards and etc. But no human beings. So it was uninhabited island on the shores of the Red Sea. Now there is a sea called, its name is the Red Sea. It is called the Red Sea because, well, that's where it is. It has always been called the Red Sea. So there, in an uninhabited island, lived a Parsi. Parsi is a human being. He belongs to a particular community, group of people. They are called as Parsis. And from whose hat, the Parsi had a hat. So from his hat, the rays of the sun were reflected. So his hat was nice, and the rays of the sun got reflected in more than oriental splendor. It would be fantastic. Oh yes, where's that beautiful brilliance? Oh, that is from the hat of the Parsi. What is it? It is the sun's rays getting reflected. And the Parsi lived by the Red Sea with nothing but his hat and his knife. So the Parsi lived by the Red Sea and he had nothing except his hat, which reflected the sun's rays brilliantly. And he had a knife. And he had a cooking stove of the kind that you must particularly never touch. Oh, this cooking stove, if you touch, maybe it will burn your fingers. It's a cooking stove of the kind that you must particularly never touch. And one day he took flour and water and currants and plums and sugar and things and made himself one cake, which was 2 feet across and 3 feet thick. So he took flour, he took water, he took currants, he took plums, that's 4 items, he took sugar, that's 5 items, and things, maybe clove and maybe cardamom, maybe various flavorings, etc., and things. And he made himself one cake. He made a big cake. And how big was it? It was 2 feet across. You have a foot rule, so 1 foot, 2 feet across. And 3 feet thick. It was 3 feet thick. So from the ground up to here, it's about 3 feet thick. So from here up to there, up to there, up to there, and here. So it was a big, like a table. It was a big fat cake. So he took all this and he made himself a cake, which was 2 feet across and 3 feet thick. It was indeed a superior comestible. It was indeed a superior comestible. So that's the name of the cake, the type of cake, superior comestible. That's a magic cake. And he put it on the stove because he was allowed to cook on that stove. Now that's the stove which you should not touch, because if you touch, What will happen? You must particularly never touch. It doesn't say what will happen. But this uh, this Parsi was allowed to use that stove. So he made all this cake, and he put it on the stove because he was allowed to cook on that stove. And he baked it, and he baked it till it was all done brown and smelt most sentimental. So it had to do a lot of time cooking, baking until it started smelling nice and sentimental means, oh, it's so nice. I love it. I love that cake. So until people started feeling like that, it was being cooked. But just as he was going to eat it, there came down to the beach from the altogether uninhabited interior one rhinoceros with a horn on his nose. So he was about to eat it when from that uninhabited island, from inside, from the altogether uninhabited interior, or came one rhinoceros. You know what a rhino is? A rhinoceros is the one with a nose, and it has got a horn on its nose. Rhinoceros with a horn on its ear. That's what it says, on its nose. Two piggy eyes and a few manners. It has no manners. In those days, the rhinoceros skin fitted him quite tight. There were no wrinkles in it anywhere. He looked exactly like a Noah's Ark rhinoceros. It fitted the rhinoceros skin fitted him perfectly, and there were no wrinkles in it. He looked exactly like a Noah's Ark rhino, but of course, he was much bigger. All the same, he had no manners then, and he has no manners now, and he never will have any manners. The rhino is a mannerless guy. He said, "How?" And the Parsi left that cake and climbed to the top of a palm tree with nothing on but his hat, from which the rays of the sun were always reflected in more than oriental splendor. So the rhinoceros appeared from the interior of the uninhabited island, and it came and he said, "How?" The Parsi looked out. Who is saying how? And he saw the rhino. So he got so scared, in a jiffy, he climbed up the top of the palm tree. And he was wearing nothing except his hat. And that's the hat from which the rays of the sun were getting reflected. So except the hat from which the rays of the sun were always reflected in more than oriental splendor. Splendor means magnificent. And the rhinoceros upset the oil stove with his nose. So the rhinoceros came and poked like that, and the oil stove was upset. It fell on its side. And the cake rolled on the sand. So the cake fell down on the sand, and it rolled over. And he spiked that cake on the horn of his nose. So the rhino butted the stove, and the cake fell on the sand and rolled over. Then the rhino put his horn into the cake and lifted it at the end of his nose, and he ate it. And he went away, waving his tail to the desolate and exclusively uninhabited interior, which abuts on the islands of the Mazandaran, Socotra, and the promontories of the larger equinox. Then the Parsi came down. So when the Rhino went away, the Parsi came down from his palm tree and he put the stove back straight on its legs and recited the following verse, which, as you have not heard, I will now proceed to relate. Them that takes the cakes, which the Parsi man bakes, makes dreadful mistakes. So the Parsi man then took the cake and is recited the following sloka. Sloka is a verse. What he said is, them that takes the cakes, which the Parsi man bakes, makes dreadful mistakes. And there was a great deal more in that than you would think. Because 5 weeks later, there was a heat wave in the Red Sea. And everybody took off all the clothes they had. The Parsi took off his hat, but the rhinoceros took off his skin. So everybody took off all their clothes. The Parsi took off his hat, and the rhinoceros took off his skin and carried it over his shoulder as he came down to the beach to bathe. In those days, it buttoned underneath with 3 buttons and looked like a waterproof. He said nothing whatever about the Parsi's cake because he had eaten it all. And he never had any manners then, since, or thenceforward. He waddled straight into the water and blew bubbles through his nose, leaving his skin on the beach. So the rhinoceros came with his skin on his shoulder, over his shoulder, and he left it on the beach and walked straight into the water and started blowing bubbles through the water, through his nose. Presently, the Parsi came by and found the skin, and he smiled one smile that ran all around his face 2 times. So the Parsi saw that skin and he smiled so widely that his smile went round his face 2 times. That's funny. Where is that? Then he danced 3 times round the skin. Then the Parsi danced 3 times round the skin. And he smiled one smile that ran round all his face 2 times. Then he danced 3 times round the skin and rubbed his hands. Then he went to his camp and filled his hat with cake crumbs. For the Parsi never ate anything but cake and never swept out his camp. He took that skin and he rubbed that skin just as full of old, dry, stale, tickly cake crumbs and some burned currants as ever it could possibly hold. So he took that skin and he swept everything into that skin as much as it could hold. Then he climbed to the top of his palm tree and waited for the rhinoceros to come out of the water and to put it on. So then he left that skin there and he climbed up the tree. That's what I understood. And the rhinoceros came. He buttoned it up with the 3 buttons. This rhinoceros coat had 3 buttons, so rhinoceros came out of the water, put on the coat and put on the 3 buttons. And it tickled like cake crumbs in bed. Then he wanted to scratch, but that made it worse. And then he lay down on the sands and rolled and rolled and rolled. And every time he rolled, the cake crumbs tickled him worse and worse and worse. So the cake crumbs were all inside the skin, which now the rhinoceros had put on, as a coat, and he had buttoned up all the three buttons, and then it was itching, scratching, and it was tickling him worse and worse. And the rhinoceros was rolling this way and that way in the sand. He rubbed so much and so hard that he rubbed his skin into a great fold over his shoulders, and another fold underneath, where the buttons used to be. But he rubbed the buttons off. So it was scratching so much that when he scratched, the buttons were rubbed off. And then he got a fold here, he got a fold under the belly, etc. And he rubbed some more folds over his legs. And it spoiled his temper. But it didn't make the least difference to the cake crumbs. They were inside his skin and they tickled. So he went on getting tickled. So he went home very angry indeed and horribly scratchy. And from that day to this day, every rhinoceros has great folds in his skin and a very bad temper, all on account of the cake crumbs inside his skin. But the Parsi came down from his palm tree wearing his hat, from which the rays of the sun were reflected in more than oriental splendor, packed up his cooking stove, and went away in the direction of the Orotavo, Amigadala, the upland meadows of Anantarivo, and the marshes of Sonaput. So that's the story. It's all imagination and a story. And it has nothing real or relevant to reality.
It's a children's story.
It's a children's story. Okay, that was one nice story. I think the child would enjoy it.